Good morning, everyone. Really good to see you all this morning. It's a long passage this morning, and so you guys, it's like a page and a half on my notes. I do have, bigger writing, bigger font, but it is a page and a half. So bear with me. It's a story that we're all relatively familiar with. It's from 1 Samuel, and it is the story of David and Goliath. Right? It feels pretty well known. I actually cut out the first half of the passage so that we didn't have to read all of it, but just to give, I'm sorry.
That's a really sensitive spot.
They're cooler. Heretics are cooler anyway. I'm going to set up the part that I'm not reading, but it's basically the first part of the text is a lot of detailing exactly how tall Goliath is. There's lots of measurements. There's lots of intricate details about the armor that he's wearing. And then he comes out to the Israelite community and is like, whoever defeats me, if your people defeat me, then that will mean that the Israelites have defeated the Philistines. But if I defeat your champion, then we win. And it's this sort of let's do a man-to-man situation rather than have this epic battle between the two groups. And he kind of lays this out before the Israelite community, and they're kind of like, no, we're good. We're just going to go ahead with the normal battle, army to army versus man to man. You're way too daunting, and we don't think that we have a champion that can defeat you. So let's just do an army to army battle versus man to man. Okay, enter David. I'm going to begin in verse 20, and it actually does skip a little bit around. So it's verses 20 through 36, and then we jump down to 47, I think. Maybe, or 37. I don't know. My numbers are weird on my page. So hang with me. David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with the keeper, took the provisions, and went as Jesse had commanded him. He came to the encampment as the army was going forth to the battle line, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage, ran to the ranks, and went and greeted his brothers. As he talked with them, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before. And David heard him. David said to Saul, "Let no one's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for you are just a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and whenever a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it and struck it down, rescuing the lamb from its mouth. And if it turned against me, I would catch it by the jaw, strike it down, and kill it. Your servant has killed both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, since he has defied the armies of the living God." David said, "The Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will save me from the hand of this Philistine." So Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a bronze helmet on his head and clothed him with the coat of mail. David strapped Saul's sword over the armor, and he tried in vain to walk, for he was not used to them. And then David said to Saul, "I cannot walk with these, for I am not used to them." So David removed them. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the wadi and put them in his shepherd's bag in the pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. The Philistine came out and drew near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with a stick?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistines said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the field." But David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the Philistine army this very day to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of this earth, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not save by sword or spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." When the Philistine drew nearer to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, slung it, and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. The word of the Lord. I was reading this week about the volcanic eruption that happened in 1980 at Mount Saint Helens. I don't know if you've heard of this. So some of us remember it, some of us not so much. But after the eruption, scientists, naturalists, they were all like, the land is devastated. It's covered in ash. Like, we will not see new growth in our lifetime. It will take multiple generations for there to be any sense of new creation, of any sort of life after the devastation of this volcanic eruption. But in reality, there is currently, in this generation, new life, growth. There is new foliage. There are animals coming back. It is, granted, not what it used to be, but they are seeing life cropping up everywhere. And as I was reading about this, I'm going to quote the book that I was reading, because what scientists know now, quote, but didn't understand then, is that when the mountain blasted ash and rock across the landscape, the devastation passed over some small places hidden in the lee of rocks and trees. Here, a bed of moss and deer fern under a rotting log. There, under a boulder, a patch of pearly everlasting and the tunnel to a vole's musty nest. These little pockets of safeties are called refugia. They're tiny coverts where life persists and out of which new life emerges. And as I read that this week, I couldn't help but also think about the text that we're reading this morning. Because the Israelites were coming up against what would have been devastation for them. It would have been a complete destruction of who they are as a people. Their land would be taken over by an oppressive system. Devastation was in their wake. And they thought the only way to fight the devastation would be to come power to power, like devastation with a bigger devastation, right? And then here comes David. And he says, how about no? How about not that? How about instead of armor, it's a pebble? How about instead of an army, it's a shepherd? And maybe that's what will bring down these forces of oppression that are threatening to devastate us as a people. In that way, I kind of think of Israel as a refugia in that moment, or David himself. Because I can't help it, I'm going to give a little bit of history and context, because that's who I am. This whole champion-to-champion type of warfare was very common among the Greeks at this time. It wasn't really a practice in Israel or that area, but the Greeks would do this. Think about like the Iliad, right, where there was this, like, you had, I can't remember their names, but you had the two champions who were like up against each other, and like it was sort of this like agreed upon thing. They would fight, and whoever won, then that army would win. But it kind of like, you know, we're not going to have these messy battles. We're not going to have all of this loss of life. It's just one champion against one champion. Clean and simple, done, agreed upon. Whoever wins, wins. And what I didn't read for time's sake was that Goliath was putting on all of this armor, and it was emphasizing how great he was, how grand he was, and just like the majesty of his armor. And it also highlights that the armor was protecting his body. There was no vulnerable parts that were being exposed. He was fully protected by this armor. And so here are the Israelites coming up against this sort of new idea of a champion, and I get their response, right? No, I'm good. You're big. You're suited up. I'm good. Like, maybe if we like disperse the power throughout our armies and your armies, we actually have a shot of winning this thing. But like, you put one giant, or maybe probably not actually a giant, but very large, big man who's been trained as a warrior his whole life against one of our guys, we don't have anybody who's going to even hold up to him. And so Israel's like, I'm good. We'll take our chances, army to army, because at least in that way, it makes sense. The narrative is power defeats power, greater power defeats lesser power, and so it makes sense to us. Let's just put our armies up against each other and see what happens. And then David comes. And he doesn't hear the initial taunts, but he hears it a second time as he's coming to bring supplies to his family. And he hears Goliath mock his God and defy the God of Israel. And his response is to be disappointed in his fellow Israelites. Why aren't you rushing to defend against what is being said about our God? David responds with, I will not let my God be mocked. I'll stand, I'll fight. And then David gives receipts, and I love this. He's like, I've totally killed a lion and a bear. Like, it's a regular thing for me. Like, I've done this before, maybe a smaller scale, maybe he wasn't a giant, but like, I know how to protect my sheep. That's the job of a shepherd. I may not look like much, but I've done some things. I've defended what was placed in front of me. I defended what I was made responsible for. I killed the lion. I killed the bear. I can do this. What's one more thing that's coming up against us that I feel the need to defend? It's almost like he's like giving his credibility, right? Guys, I can do this. I've done it before. And so at this point, Saul's kind of like, all right, dude, go for it, right? But let me at least give you some armor. Let's at least get you suited up. Let's at least protect the vulnerable spots. Let's at least make you look like you could possibly be some sort of threat to this large man that you're about to come up against. Because I have my doubts. So he puts on this armor that is supposed to protect him from all of these vulnerable spaces. He says, David, suit up. I can't not think of Iron Man. Protecting all of his parts. And he can't walk. He can't even walk. He can't function. He can't be who he knows to be. And he knows that the strength doesn't lie in this ill-fitting armor. The strength of David lies in the fact that he is who he is. The way he defeated the bear and the lion was good enough, and it should be good enough now. I don't need to put on any expectations or weight or armor that's actually going to hide my vulnerable spots. David knows who he is. He knows who is for him, God, and he knows the best way that he's going to be able to defeat the army, to defeat Goliath. Not with armor, but with a small stone. And he wins. He defeats Goliath. He defeats the oppressive system. He saves his people from devastation with a stone, well placed, and the oppressive person is brought low. I had a hard time picking one example of an oppressive system that we are up against because it feels like they are many, that they are legion, and not just one Goliath. I'll mention one because it happened this week. Louisiana passed a bill or a law or whatever that's mandating that the 10 Commandments be posted in every school building. And we're like, that's fine. But also the thing about Louisiana is they're like third on the list of children experiencing poverty. They are third on the list of education statewide. What are the 10 Commandments in the school going to do for the kids who are coming to school hungry? What are the 10 Commandments in school going to do for the mass shootings that have happened across our country? Children are going hungry. Children are dying in the place where they're meant to be educated and empowered. And yet there's a large number of Christians who are celebrating this law as a sort of like a step in the right direction for the United States to become a Christian nation under the false assumption that we ever were. I'm not even going to pretend. The idea is that somehow these words posted will change hearts and minds. Believing that maybe the way that we, Christian nationalism, I say, the way that we fight against the evils of the world are by just becoming a bigger power and forcing people to believe and act a certain way, not realizing that the God that's being proclaimed in that context is a God of hate and wrath. And in that way, defying and defiling the name of God. That's one thing that we are up against. We are up against a false version of who God is. A God that would want to overpower and manipulate and mandate and force and coerce, rather than a God of love. And I get the resonate so much with Israel's response because it feels really big. It feels really daunting. I can't be in a conversation with folks where politics don't come up and how terrified I am for the next election. I can't be in a conversation where we're not talking about the wage gap and the underserved communities in our city. I can't be in a conversation that doesn't involve the ways that we are killing our planet. I can't avoid in conversations the way that the patriarchy has continued to silence the voices of women. It's all around us, it's big and it's overwhelming, and we hear the words Christian nationalism or racism or sexism, and the isms just become overwhelming, and I just want to be like, nah, I'm good. I'm really good. I'm just going to try and like do my own thing. I'm working on, raising my children better. And, I've got my own little spot. And I'm just like, I just want to like try and get through it. Like, let's just try and survive this. Or feel the the compulsion to meet that powerful energy with this sort of like ill-fitting power that isn't who I truly am or who we truly are as a community, and try and fight these powers in the same way, match that same power with power. And I can go on and on about how we just need to reframe the whole idea of power. That's a whole different conversation, because I think real power doesn't look the way that we as Christians have been representing it, or the world has been representing it. Like, true power comes through love, acts of kindness, care for one another, flipping the narrative, being like David and say, actually, no, I'm not going to wear the suit. That's not who I am. That's not going to work for me. I know how to use a slingshot and a stone, so I'm going to use the tools that I know how to use. I'm going to be fully who I am. Don't put your expectations on me. No, thank you. In the text, David also has receipts, right? He's like, hey, I killed that bear when it came against my sheep. I know how to protect the people around me. I know what to do. I've done it before. Maybe this is bigger, but in my small way, I've already done it. And when I get the most overwhelmed and the most sort of like angry and frustrated at these like forces that are defiling the God that I love and serve, and forcing me to try and think of different ways to, like, do I even call myself a Christian? Yes, okay? Yes, because you don't get to decide for me what that means. I'm going to choose to decide what that means. And it's that yes. It's that refusal to let the narrative continue. It's in our small ways to say, you don't get to decide. You don't get to decide. I'm here too. My experience of God is different than that. I think we do it really well in our community. I think we are a small group. We know that. I don't even have to say it, right? But even in the small ways that we are trying to embody an egalitarian structure, where we're breaking down the hierarchies, where we're flipping the narrative, where we're attempting to say, no, everybody who comes into this space is value. Everybody's voice is important. Everybody's bringing a beautiful piece to the table. Everyone's offering value, relationship, a place to heal, a place to offer healing, a place to have an impact in our small way in this community that we are a part of. We are a little refugia here on Dodson Avenue, about to be on Glass Street. A little pocket of life where new life can come forward. And I want to just take a minute before we move on to communion. I mentioned some of the ways that I see our little community doing small things that bring about, that maybe are more powerful than we think that they are. And I just want to ask you all, what do you see? What do you see in our community? What are ways that you personally or collectively as a community have seen the love of God that is actually power in small ways that we've been able to be and bring new life to the places that we're in. So I'm going to sit and just let you guys meditate on that a little bit. If you want to share something that comes to mind, that's great. Or we'll just sit for a little while and then we'll come